Welcome back, everyone. So my most anticipated set is here. We have Anakin and Sebulba's Pod Racers. Before we get started, I want to let you know about two Facebook groups that I really enjoy. We have Star Wars Micro Galaxy Squadron and Fleet Collectors. And then we have Star Wars Micro Galaxy Squadron. Both are great groups with a lot of collectors who are willing to share tips, tricks, customs, dios, and even selling and trading vehicles to help add them to your collection. Man, am I excited about this set. Ever since the announcement of this, it's been my most anticipated vehicle from Micro Galaxy Squadron, hands down. So I was 9 years old when this came out, when The Phantom Menace came out, and so I grew up with the prequels, and they will always have a special place in my heart. And watching this film, like, something about pod racing just like stuck with me, and I've been obsessed with it ever since then. Like, I wish we had more like vehicles and things about pod racing. So to have this in hand in my collection is just a dream come true. Now, I was only able to get this because of my friend Raul, who was in Mexico visiting, and that's why the plastic kind of looks the way that it does. The heat in the car just like shrunk the plastic, so it looks all deformed, but everything else in there looks intact and perfect. So if it wasn't for him, I would not have this in my collection right now. So as many of you know, these were supposed to hit the States in like May, and Walmart's never stocked them. It's an exclusive there. And then so, you know, some time goes by, and then Walmart's in Mexico started getting them, which is why I resorted to get one from there. And what's funny now is, as I have this on my table, these are now hitting Walmarts in the States. I think Utah and like New Jersey Walmarts are getting them, and the price for them is $22. So they eventually reached us. It just took a lot longer than anticipated, but I couldn't be happier to have it right now to review for y'all. The back of the packaging does have some great illustrations of these two pods. It does seem like Sebulba's cockpit will actually detach like we see within the film, and then Anakin's drag fins will open up as well. And we have the two figures to place inside of those cockpits. The side of the packaging has some beautiful artwork of that Boonta Eve race. You know, I'm gonna have to find another one of these from Walmart that's in like pristine condition to display, because I mean, this is just too gorgeous. And of course, here is the barcode to help you track this down at your Walmart stores. I think this should be taking the place of the troop transport. Alright, let's nerd out about these for a little bit. The sculpting is unreal, and guess what? They come with stands. I would actually be pretty disappointed if they didn't come with stands, so I'm very happy that they do, because I mean, look how you can display them like they are actually racing. There's even a bunch of ball joints to each pod that will give it more character when you're posing. So I hate that it took us this long to get them, but the only reason that I think that this happened was Walmarts weren't clearancing out all of Series 1 stock. I mean, in my area, I have a bunch of Slave 1s, I have a bunch of Razor Crest, troop transports on the bottom shelf and on the top shelf, and they weren't clearancing them all out. And the ones that I did see, it's so weird. Like, in some states, they would clearance like a Slave 1 out to $5. And then they would, another state would be clearanced at $32 or $33. And it's like, that's more than retail. Like, I don't know what you're even doing. So I'm not really sure what the deal is, but that's the only thing that I could really think of, is just that they weren't getting rid of all of Series 1, and, you know, and it was just taking up shelf space, and they couldn't put new stuff on. I mean, thankfully we got the AT-AT, but, you know, there's nothing like that from Micro Galaxy Squadron that's as expensive that needs to be replaced, so it is its own, like, designated shelf area. But thankfully they are hitting now, so all is well. So let's start with Anakin's Pod Racer, and just, I mean, having this in hand is so cool. We need the rest of the Pod Racers. If they could do not only the Ebon Hawk, but the rest of the Pod Racers throughout Micro Galaxy Squadron, I would be so happy. I mean, there's not much more that I would need from there. I mean, the pods, add the Ebon Hawk, and I'm pretty much a happy camper. The sculpting to Anakin looks great. I mean, it is the exact same resemblance that we see when he is driving this pod. He has the helmet with the little goggles. To his back, he has the same treatment. You can see there is a little belt, and then there's the cloth that comes off the back of the helmet. He does have the standard articulation that the rest of the figures have, and we can place him directly inside the pod. On the inside, there is a considerable amount of sculpting. Nothing crazy, but it is pretty traditional with what we see with the rest of the vehicles. There's a light sand wash to the pod that gives it the appearance that has been racing around the track a few times. The colors look awesome. You can see the stripes throughout. Everything looks nice and crisp. There isn't a bunch of like saturation or bleed. They also continued the paint to the bottom of the pod, which looks great and means they didn't skimp out on it. That will lead us into our first set of ball joints. So we have two here that connect the cable to the cockpit. And what's so great about that is it gives you a lot of posability, so you can maneuver the pod all different directions. And it also interacts with the rest of the ball joints and even the energy binder. So for example, you can lay it flush on the ground, just like before Anakin's getting ready to race, and then Qui-Gon gives him that little pep talk. No other pod racer that I've ever seen made was able to do this. Everything has it where it's constructed in the flying position, which is really cool because when you attach it to the stand, which it connects to the base of the engines, there's two little slots, you just line it up. You could pose it in a different direction to make it look like he's actually maneuvering or turning from side to side. That to me is next level. I mean, on this small of a vehicle, to be able to pose it, you know, in a bunch of different ways, I mean, we didn't even get that with the Hasbro ones. The next ball joint will be on the top of the engine, which connects the cable. And what's so cool about that is you can get articulation going upwards, downwards, left and right, and you can even recreate that scene when the energy binder is giving out and the pod engines are about to separate. The last area is going to be at the energy binder that has a ball joint. And again, just moving it from side to side, up and down, you can rotate the engines inwards, outwards, all different positions. And that's just so cool. Having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different ball joints. I mean, I don't think they could have constructed this or designed this any better than how it is. Some areas may seem out of scale, like the cable and then the fins, but that could have impeded with the overall design and made it not as functional. As a massive pod racer fan, I am very happy with this and what it's capable of doing. The last area that has articulation is going to be at the fins, and it's just a very minor amount. You can open them up, and I think that'll give it more of that drag resistance, especially when you're maneuvering and like turning from side to side. The only areas that I feel like are slightly out of scale are going to be the fins, the cable, and then probably the energy binder. I think these should be a little bit more narrow and longer, and then the cable and the energy binder should be a little bit more narrow also. And I think the cable might need to be a little bit longer too, but honestly, none of that kind of stuff matters to me because of how well this functions. I would rather it be this way, as close to being in scale as possible, rather than something that is completely 100% in scale, but doesn't function like it should, or if you're just going to have problems with it later. So aside from all that articulation, I gotta say the next best thing that I love about this is you could take off all of these pieces to the pod racer. I mean, even the energy binder and these two engines. I mean, look at this. Look how crazy this is. You can completely disassemble this. And I think that's awesome, especially if you're a toy photographer, because you can create a scene where you're like in a hangar and you're assembling it. And that's just really rad because, you know, that adds a lot more playability to this thing. Check this out. Thankfully, I was able to pull the Cobb Vanth Chase from Series 1, which when I saw this in the Book of Boba Fett, I about flipped out. Seeing part of Anakin Skywalker's pod racer used now as a speeder, like that was so insane to me. They're actually two different sculpts. So Cobb Vanth's is a little bit bigger, doesn't have quite as much detail. Obviously, there is this little side-by-side, and then Anakin's has a lot more details. I mean, all those little components and wires. But it's, you know, still really cool to have both of these side-by-side. And I just couldn't believe that they repurposed one of his engines into a speeder. I mean, that was just so unreal. Let's take a look at measurements. So from front of the fin to the back of the cockpits, I'd say we're about 5 inches. Resting on the ground without the stand, we are at about 3/4 of an inch. That is wild. On the stand in a racing position, we are at about 2 1/4 inches tall. Length, he is about close to 5.5 inches. And then width from engine to engine, I would say about 2.5. Alright, little Annie, enough about you. It's time for some Bulba's pod. Since I still have the tape measure out, let's do some measurements. So with the stand in a neutral racing position, I'd say we are just over 2 3/4 inches. For length, we are about 7.5. For width, man, that front looks intimidating. We are at 4.5 inches. Ground level, without the stand, I would say we are just at 2 inches. So Bulba's figure is done really well. The sculpting is a great resemblance of him. Paint applications look pretty true to what we see within the film. The only real issue I'm having is standing him independently. He just is too front or back heavy and he just topples over. He still has articulation, so I think these would be considered his feet, and then these would be considered his hands, but both of them can articulate. Driver's seat to his cockpit is done really well. Not a whole lot of paint applications, I mean just a black color throughout, and the sculpting is pretty on par with the rest of the vehicles from the line. Even included his little headrest, and that's a nice touch. He fits in there really well. His feet go straight on in, and I guess his hands, I just have them resting on like what looks like handles up there. He's also pretty snug, so he's not really going to fall out of there either. His pod has a lot more character to it. You can see the extra sculpting that they placed to the back of the cockpit, which looks really good. And then even to the front of the pod, you can see where these wires connect to the main part of the cockpit. They put a little transparent plastic piece there to kind of keep everything stable. His first set of ball joints are going to be here at the base of these cables. So like Anakin's pod, he's going to have about the same amount of maneuverability. It's going to take some tweaking because his pod is a little bit bigger, but you can kind of position it all different angles to give it the appearance that he's racing throughout Boonta. Here I want to show you how much detail they put to these engines. It's crazy to me, all these little areas that they sculpted in. You got the big old pipes right here. The underside has the same amount of treatment. Nothing is skimped out. You can see these are the slots for the stand. And what's really cool too is behind the front of the engine, you can see the 4 vents that they included, which is such a small detail, but I mean, it just adds so much more authenticity to this. The ends of the cables that connect to the body are pretty similar to Anakin's, except they go forward into the engine, whereas Anakin's go down off the top. So you really shouldn't have too much of a difference as far as like posing goes. I mean, I can still kind of twist it all different directions and I can give it some better maneuverability. And the last area is going to be here at the energy binder. 2 ball joints again. All of this connects together to help you better pose this. I love how intimidating his pod is, you know, and just the noise it made when he was right behind Anakin. Just that large clunking sound. This is just so surreal to me. The last little areas are some paint apps and like some dirt washes throughout the body of the engines. You can also see his logo. And then here's a better shot at all those components and wires. And I just think this is the icing on the cake. To be able to do this, I mean, you can create so many scenes. I mean, you can create that iconic crash scene. And, you know, all we need now is, you know, obviously Ben Quadranero's pod to split that up into 4 different engines. Both of these cables look basically the same. I don't see any real indication for a left and right. But if you look closely, you can see there's an extra piece of sculpted plastic on it. And that will help secure the ball joint into that socket a little bit better, so it's not, you know, wiggling around and being all loose. I will say, though, when putting this back together, that energy binder will get your fingers a little bit. So tread carefully. Alright everyone, that's going to wrap up this review and unboxing of the Micro Galaxy Squadron Boonta Eve Battle Pack. I gotta say, it's my favorite vehicle set throughout this entire line. It just resonates with me a little bit different, and that's how it goes for all collectors. You know, some fans are going to be more partial to, you know, the Imperial Shuttle or the AT-AT or even the Havoc Marauder. But for me, I love these pods and everything they were able to implement. We have the ball joints, the sculpting, the figures look great, and the paint apps are nice and clean. So for me, it is a big win. So I guess the biggest issue is it took a lot longer to get to us than anticipated. I resorted to importing it from a different country through a friend because I was kind of fearful that Walmart might not stock these. But of course, once it arrived, they started hitting the States. So be on the lookout. They are hitting Walmart stores now. $22.97, I believe, is the retail. Utah and New Jersey are confirmed sightings. Because they did such a great job on these pods, we have to get the rest of the racers. That and the Ebon Hawk would be the ultimate goal for me within this line. Because there's a lack of pod racing merch out there, this is so refreshing to have, and you're gonna love it in your collection. Side note, while you're looking at close-ups, one of the things that I would love to see, and I know we've been bombarded with a lot of Star Wars shows lately, but is just a show about pod racing. All new characters, no weird celebrity cameos, all new actors, all about pod racing, and then like making your way to the top. I think that would do so well. So John or Dave, if you're watching this, let's make it happen, and I would love to be a racer. Alright, Micro Galaxians, thank you so much for watching this video. If you're able to find this at your Walmart store, leave a comment down below what state to be able to help out your fellow collectors. Be sure to connect with me on Instagram to stay up to date when new things drop, like the Endor AT-AT that sold out on Amazon. I also post toy photography and toy videos. As always, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And we will see y'all racers in the next video.